ended Fontaine confused? Sit down. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to Genshin Lore with Amabi and obvious spoilers for the Fontaine Archon quest ahead. So why was Child guilty? There are a couple context clues that we can take into place to kind of sort this out. First thing we have to examine is the thing that actually gave the judgment, which is not Folklore, the Hydra Archon, or Nouvellette. It was in fact the Oradex. Which, if you don't know what that means, it is another term that's used for like an orator, which is really interesting because Fontaine seems to be greatly inspired by Rome. And orators were people who were kind of like lawyers fulfilling the role of the traveler, what Navia does and what Folklores is doing as well. Kind of like telling the story of the case and getting the audience to one side. That is how democracy and court worked in actual Roman law. I know this because I am a lawyer who was kooky in law school and took ancient Roman law. So if you have any questions about that, ask, because I'm currently dissecting and it's so fun for me. But back to Child. Nouvellette says he perceives him to be innocent, but we have to ask the Oratrice, and the Oratrice is like, nah, he's guilty. And this is kind of the problem that we have with juries, is that the Oratrice seems to weigh the opinions of the people in Fontaine, those in the audience of the Opera Epiclese, and to use that to create a verdict. And the reason this is mostly successful is the people of Fontaine seem to actually be a more intelligent crowd. They go to these public shows, they listen to case after case, and they have experience. And that actually goes a really long way in terms of saying that these people kind of have heard these court cases and they're used to argument, so they're not easily fooled. So it's fair to say perhaps the sense of justice in Fontaine is a bit better in the everyday person than perhaps in other countries. Like, say, Kujosar, who thought it was fine to just take visions. Like, maybe a Fontainian would have been like, actually, let's not. That doesn't seem very just. And the general population as a whole seems to be very vested in just and in reaching just outcomes. And we kind of see this with Nouvellette at the end of the second act of the Archon quest, actually feeling very emotionally disturbed at the fact of how Navia's father dies. But if justice is considered really important, I think it's important to recognize that there is still internal bias. And it's easy to say that when an Oratrice gives Child the guilty verdict, it is because those biases have won out. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that they associate Child with the Fatui, and the Fatui has been brought in, and this is a Fatui harbinger, who is the worst of the worst. You already kind of saw it with Lenny when he was accused. It was like, oh my god, once the Fatui thing came out, everyone's like, they're kind of bad people and stuff. But Lenny is just an orphan who was raised in the House of the Hearth. He's not even like directly connected as like a general. And so their perception of if he is a just person or if he has guilt will still remain. And one thing all of this has done is Lenny being accused kind of and he being associated with the Fatui, all of this up to Child's accusation and him sitting in court has kind of let an undercurrent in the audience's mind for the entire Archon quest that the Fatui were involved in some way. And so even though evidence is presented, that after like 2 different trials is going to be really difficult for them to unsee, even if they mentally want to. There is a subconscious bias. And so now we have to ask, was it done purposefully or was it just subconscious bias? I think that Child was very likely involved with the primordial sea when he fell into the abyss. And perhaps there's a sensation of that on him. He's not wearing his vid because it messed up, so maybe something can be sensed about him. Or it could just be his involvement with the Fatui, that in their hearts they feel he is guilty of something, even if it is not the missed disappearance, or that the Fatui are involved and thus by byproduct, Child is guilty. They just don't know how yet. But Nouvellette, who only goes based off the facts and is perhaps the, if you said justice was a scale, the highest measure of justice in Fontaine, won't kind of have the wishy-washy feelings the people might. The other thing that could have happened is Arlecchino could have set Child up. We kind of see this in Liyue, that the schemes are happening behind the scenes. Like Senora set Child up for failure and she was involved in the back plot of that. We could be seeing another case where Arlecchino is like maybe actually kind of responsible for some of the things going on, or she needs to take responsibility. We don't know what. Arlecchino has a foot in the door with this and needs to shift the blame onto a different harbinger because there is a bit of infighting. We know that from Scaramouche and Child's voice lines. And so to get a leg ahead, having Child take the fall here is good. And I think this kind of matches in the trailer when we see Arlecchino setting the stage and pushing it. She is standing in the Opera Eclese where this is happening, kind of implying that she has set up what is going to happen in the first 2 parts of the Archon quest. I would not be surprised if that ended up to be the case. Let me know which, if any, theory you liked in the comments. Like and follow for more, and always stay attuned to my page. I'm coming out with some new poetry soon, and I'm excited to share it with y'all.